Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. My name is Sean Slatter, and for 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. On this episode, I'm really excited to talk about a client that we've had a long relationship with. It really was the genesis of our economic development and social impact work. As I had mentioned a couple of times throughout the last year, this concept of the podcast emanated from a request by our team that we hold a weekly virtual team meeting, or what we would call a virtual team conference. We abbreviated it VTC. And it started when we went to a virtual environment due to COVID, and it continued as a tradition. And every time we tried to stop that, our team would say, this is an important part of the business. We learned so much, and we would get direction and guidance from the team on topics that they were interested in. And it ranged from everything from the history of the company to specific engagements, skill sets. And so it started that once a week we were holding these VTCs. Then the team asked us to expand to twice a week schedule, which we did. And so every Monday we would hold a virtual team conference, and every Friday we would wrap up the week with a VTC as well. And we recorded several hundred of these VTCs. And we've recently been going through this archive and pulling out some of the timeless recordings that we did during the past 2 years. And our communications team, who I adore, are putting together a series of small episodes that will be released similar to the VTC schedule that we had for the previous 2 years, where every Monday you'll have the current events long form podcast that we have been doing now for several months, starting last year. And then there will be a small, shorter podcast and looking at some of the skill sets, the history, and relevant topics, some of the timeless topics of LSI. And for this first episode, for the short form podcast, we have chosen a history of this account that I'm going to talk about that we have worked with for nearly 30 years. And the client is Arctic Slope. They have just an amazing history, and it really correlates well with my own career and history. And I have been working closely with Arctic Slope over the last 30 years and have seen this exponential growth, much of which was the LSI strategy from over 30 years ago. So this was an episode that was originally recorded the 29th of June 2020 and has been a point of reference for our team and even some of our clients on what is possible, what does the LSI model look like, how is business development and the LSI strategy relevant to both economic development and social impact. And this is really illustrative of the possible. At the time that we recorded this VTC, We had a large team inside of ASRC, and I mentioned that in this recording as well. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm looking forward to pushing a lot of these small, short version podcasts on Thursday or Friday of the week. So enjoy this, and this will be the start of many other similar podcasts to come. This morning, I wanted to spend this time talking about one of our clients, and I've had a lot of opportunity to tell this story several times over the last year, I would guess. There's a renewed interest in the story that I'm about to tell you. And as I reflect back on this history that goes back almost 30 years, it's just, it's one of those events in my career that it has not been a significant win. It hasn't been a working with a large Fortune 500 company, a Lockheed, Boeing, or Northrop. It's been a history that has been a series of really good, just great work by our team, and the creativity that has made this history so special. So let me give you some foundation before I start. After the state of Alaska, the territory of Alaska, became a state in 1959, about 10 years into this new relationship that we had with now the state of Alaska after over 100 years, there was a lot of discussion regarding what should we do with the land, and especially the land and the native Alaskan populations. And I think there was a lot of concern about what had happened with the United States treatment of the Native American tribes, and there was a commitment that we wouldn't repeat that history. And so in this discussion, a few things happened. By the early 70s, there was, so about 10 years after Alaska became a state, there was a lot of analysis and studies of the Alaska Native populations, the history, and the land. And unlike the Native American tribes in the lower 48 states, the Alaskan Natives were really organized into villages. There was a lot of separation just by geography, but there was language separation and whatnot as well. There was a decision at that time that instead of creating reservations and some of the challenges that had been experienced with the 400 Native American tribes, there was a decision to organize these Alaskan Native tribes or villages into corporations, where the idea was that instead of creating a reservation, the U.S. government would assist the villages organize into corporations, and all of the members of these villages would have equity in this corporation. And initially, there were 12 Alaska Native ANC corporations. And most of the corporations poured land and other assets into these corporations, and they were organized just like any other U.S. corporation. And as I said, there was initially there was 10 and grew to 12. And that was in 1971 that finally happened, after Alaska became a state in 1959. Most of these corporations didn't have much revenue. They had assets in the corporation, which was primarily land, but there wasn't a lot of equity for the members. And the idea was that these corporations would be held for the Alaska Natives they would all be shareholders in these corporations, and then they would take dividends, and it would be a intergenerational plan to support the Alaska Natives long term. So for about 20 years, from 1971 to 1990, there was a little bit of activity. A lot of the employees and revenue from these corporations came from really the oil fields. There was labor that was dedicated to a lot of the oil companies. There was some rent, and a lot of the regional corporations allowed the large oil and energy companies to drill on their land. So there was a little bit of revenue there, but it just not a lot. It had not, after 20 years, it really had not materialized into what this vision was. In the early 1990s, I think this was 1995, it could have been 94, but around 1995, one of these corporations had decided they were going to look at business development and creating a strategy to grow the business. They looked back after a 20-year period of organization and had seen no real growth in the corporation. And interestingly, how some of our engagements start, the history was we were working with Boeing at McClellan Air Force Base on a large base operation program. And through our contact at Boeing, we received a call, and they said, we have this company from Alaska that called us. They want to grow their business. They don't really know how. Would you be willing to talk with them? And we said, of course. The leadership, there were 10 people that flew from Nome, Alaska, the North Slope, and then Anchorage, where the headquarters of the company was organized. The majority of the shareholders lived on the North Slope, but the actual office, which was a few people at the time, was headquartered in Anchorage. They flew to our corporate headquarters, and we had a meeting with them. And this company, the name of this company was the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. And we had this great strategy session with them. They said they told us this story, which nobody had heard of at the time. And they said, our people have high unemployment, and we've got a lot of social problems, and we have this idea that if we could build jobs through this corporation, that we could bring our village out of poverty. And as I look back, as I said, as I look back on this engagement now, 25, almost 30 years later, I didn't realize the link that this discussion would have with a lot of our economic development work that is going on today, and especially our social impact work. This really is the genesis of a lot of the economic development and the social impact work. So we had this 2-day session with the client. And it was interesting. It was, I remember they started the meeting telling us this history, and then we spent about 3 hours where they gave us some history on their culture. They told us that their village, think of it as a tribal entity, but their village, the members, the shareholders of the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation was about 7,000 people, and very dispersed on the North Slope of Alaska. So as we've tried to build a strategy on how we were going to help this company grow, we started saying, what do you do? What kind of capabilities do you have? What is the history? There really wasn't any. This was a holding company for real estate and other assets, but there was no real value at that time being produced. So at the end, I can remember they said they were $30 to $50 million in revenue, and most of that was support for the oil pipeline in Alaska, labor and maintenance, and then some rent on their land. But other than that, they had no real history. So when they left, we brought our team together, and I said, what are we going to do with this company? They had some money that they were going to invest in this, but really more than anything, what we saw was this commitment by the leadership of ASRC to grow. And I think the other interesting piece of this was that I recognized a spark in our discussion with their leadership team that they had a lot of trust in us and believed that we could help them grow. So we came up with this idea and said, we're going to help them become a government contractor. We're going to help them win new business, even though they had no history, no capability, no past performance. And we started by helping them win a ground maintenance contract for Travis Air Force Base in California. It was a $1 million a year contract, and it was cutting the lawns and managing the grounds of this Air Force base. And so we helped them through this. We wrote the proposal. We helped them start the contract. We helped them hire these people that would be doing this work. And it was the majority at that time, the majority of the labor on this contract was like $6 or $7 an hour. But they did really well, and we started winning them all of these base support contracts across the country. We helped Arctic Slope win a janitorial and housekeeping contract. We helped them win just basic maintenance, facility maintenance contracts. And then we brought to them in the late 1990s, a lot of the DoD bases had this idea, what if we contract out base operations, all of the maintenance and functions of a installation to a third party? We helped them win their first base operation contract, which we abbreviated with the acronym BOSS contract, BOS, Base Operation Support Contract. And it really changed their business. These contracts now were even though it was fairly basic and blue collar labor, it was complex, and there were a lot of facets to this. And one of the elements of base operation was communications. They would manage the communications of an installation. They also had many of these base operation contracts would outsource the civil engineering to this third party. So all of a sudden they had these large contracts. These contracts now were $20, $30 million a year. And now they had some real past performance. They had engineering capability and communications capabilities. They were on site at these installations supporting the computer networks, for example. Like I said, this really transformed their company. And in a short period of time, we positioned ASRC to be the leading BOSS provider in the country. They had won most of the base operation support contracts. Also around this time, what was happening is they had a real champion for their work in a senator named Ted Stevens from Alaska. And we worked with Ted Stevens' staff in Washington, D.C. to start creating some set-aside work for Alaska Native corporations, and not just for the ANCs, but also for the Native American corporations and the Native Hawaiian corporations, which is just now becoming a popular concept for a lot of the Native Hawaiians. Ted Stevens, there were a lot of the defense contractors that still to this day are upset with the work that he did. And we had a lot of support behind Senator Stevens. And if you don't know his story, I'm not going to talk about it, but he was a very interesting individual and ended up being killed in a plane crash, sort of at the peak of his career. But in this policy work that we started working through Senator Stevens' office, we created the ability for Alaska Natives and Native Americans to become 8A contractors. And if you're not familiar with the 8A program, it's a government initiative under the Small Business Administration that will give certain privileges for disadvantaged businesses. And we started winning a lot of these base operation contracts for Arctic Slope, initially as 8A set-aside contracts, meaning that only other 8A companies could compete for this work. And then over time began helping these companies win this work through what's called direct award, meaning that as an Alaska Native corporation, if the corporation can show that it has capability, that the government can award this contract to the entity without competition under a direct award contract. At that time, no one had heard of this. We really pioneered this concept. And I remember going to Anchorage in the late 1990s or early 2000s and meeting with the ASRC leadership team and their board. They actually invited us to a board meeting, and they said, they were astounded by what had happened in a short period of time. In less than 10 years, we had taken this company with no real revenue, no capability, to becoming one of the leading government contractors in a specific niche, this base operation support work. And a lot of that just came through creativity and persistence. And I'm really proud of the work that we did on this. And like I said, most of you have never heard of this company, ASRC. They're not a Lockheed, they're not a Boeing. But let me tell you, the creativity of our team led to long-term impact for their company, the shareholders, the Alaskan Natives that are members of this corporation, the village, and for LSI. And a lot of the policy work that has happened over the last, especially the last 20 years, we pioneered this. The LSI pioneered this work. What happened was, at this board meeting that I had mentioned, the board was prepared, and they said to me, "We've got a challenge for you. We want to have you take us to a $1 billion entity." Just less than 10 years before, as we started working with ASRC, there was no way that they had no path to get there. And through the great strategy of our team and ASRC trusting us, now we're talking about bringing ASRC to $1 billion. And a few years later, we hit that $1 billion mark. And what has happened now over the last 20 years, interestingly, we're still working with ASRC. Today, we probably have a dozen people on assignment, on a long-term engagement, helping ASRC still to this day win business. ASRC is a very different company than it was even in the early 2000s, 20 years ago. Most of their work now is IT and technology. They really have become well known in the Department of Defense and other FedCiv organizations as being a solution provider in technology. I think back about that first contract that we helped ASRC win, this ground maintenance contract, cutting grass and pulling weeds, to what they're doing today. It's amazing. The company today is $3 billion. Our team, over the course of the last 25 years, has been instrumental in helping ASRC grow their company from $30 million or less to now $3 billion. And they have an objective to build the company to a $5 billion corporation. One of the things that along the way, there were just so many stories of, as we had used the 8A and even the initial ANC set aside vehicles to support this client. Early on, there was, and I mean, even still today, but early on, there was a cap and a time limit that you could be in the program. So initially, when ASRC was and became an 8A company, they had 6 years, and it was like $5 or $6 million of cap in revenue before they graduated out of the 8A program. Well, we hit that immediately. We hit that ceiling with just one of these base operation contracts, and then they were out of the program. So what we did, we went back and worked, as I said, worked closely with, in the early 2000s, we worked closely with Senator Stevens' group and the SBA and Arctic Slope. And what we determined was this corporation is held by these shareholders. So why not start a new corporation held by pulling these other shareholders out, and they start a new corporation? I think today somebody had told me that ASRC has 300 separate entities still competing under the 8A program, and now with recent change in legislation and SBA code, competing under the Super 8A initiative. It's remarkable what they've achieved, and I believe that at some point you're going to hear of ASRC becoming one of the top defense contractors in the country. So on the business side, it's an amazing story. Let me tell you what happened on the economic development and social impact side. There's 7,000 shareholders today. What's amazing, and looking back on this now, and to see that the kind of impact that this has had on the members of this corporation, the Alaskan Natives. This group has the highest per capita education rates. They have the lowest domestic violence rates of any of the Alaskan Native or Native American tribal entities. They have the highest per capita income. They have their overall standard of living on the North Slope of Alaska is the highest of any of the other Alaskan Native corporations and most of the Native American corporations, Native American reservations. Lowest unemployment, lowest domestic violence, lowest substance abuse, lowest high school dropouts. It's allowed them to really take the equity that they have recognized, and they get large dividends, like being a shareholder in a Fortune 500 company. They have actual equity and recognize these annual dividends. It's allowed them to preserve their heritage. It's allowed them to also educate their children. It really has transformed this organization every conceivable way possible. And when I started this VTC this morning, I said this is one of those engagements over the years that it's not shiny, and it wasn't a big win. It took a lot of time, but it was the creativity of our team and persistence that has led to a lot of different things. I hope that this story has given you some understanding of the link that we have back to some of our economic development and the social impact work that we're doing throughout the corporation, throughout LSI. I'm so proud of it. And it's led to a lot of other interesting projects. The Department of Interior was so impressed with the work that we had done with ASRC over the last 25 years that they have really collaborated with us to replicate this with other Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian organizations throughout the U.S. We continue to monitor the policy and the program for the tribal entities. It's something that's dear to my heart, and I think will continue to do amazing things over the next 20 years working with our tribal clients. In fact, just this week, the Department of Interior, this group that we've worked closely with now for several years, has issued some grants that we really helped influence, and we're working with several clients on these grants. So I hope that was helpful. I've been asked several times over the last year to talk about our work with ASRC, and I hope that you can see this link that we have and history and legacy that we have in economic development and social impact. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the genesis of a lot of the work that we're doing today in the other disciplines. And it's something I'm really proud of. It's a great story for us, for Arctic Slope, and for the Arctic Slope shareholders. Thank you for listening to this episode and history of Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, or what we abbreviate it ASRC. As I had mentioned when I opened this podcast, this is really representative of the possible work and the impact that LSI can have with an organization. And it also is the link and a lot of the genesis behind our economic development and social impact work. It really started 30 years ago with this specific client, and we've seen an incredible impact in this community with this company in making just incredible difference in the lives of so many people. If you have an interest in this kind of business development for your company, if you have an interest in growing jobs and economic prosperity in your region, if you have responsibility for revenue for a government entity or for a economic development or social impact organization, please contact us and we can give you guidance on how to win new business, how to increase jobs, how to create long-term economic prosperity in regions with demographics and at the individual level. We will put all of this information in the episode notes, and you can contact us through the episode notes, and somebody will get back to you quickly. Thank you.